The transport ship. Meridian's Hope drifted through the void between star systems, its hull scarred from countless journeys through hostile space. Inside the cramped passenger compartment, dozens of beings from various species huddled together, refugees fleeing the ongoing war between the Keltharian Empire and the Free Coalition worlds. Lieutenant Zara Chen sat quietly in the corner, her small frame almost lost among the towering alien passengers. At barely 5 feet tall and weighing no more than 100 pounds, she drew pitying glances from the other travelers. Her pale skin bore the telltale signs of someone who had spent too much time in artificial environments, and her thin arms seemed barely capable of lifting the small travel bag at her feet. The Krillian warrior next to her, standing nearly 8 feet tall with chitinous armor plating covering his body, looked down at her with what might have been concern. "Little human," he rumbled in accented standard. "This journey takes us through dangerous space. The Shadowborn pirates hunt in these sectors. You should stay close to the warriors when trouble comes." Zara smiled politely, her voice soft and musical. "Thank you for the warning. I'll be careful." She tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear, the gesture making her appear even more delicate and vulnerable. Across the compartment, a group of Velthan mercenaries whispered among themselves, their serpentine heads weaving as they spoke in their hissing language. One of them, a scarred veteran with cybernetic implants replacing half his face, kept glancing at Zara with predatory interest. The Velthans were known for their cruelty, especially toward species they considered weak. The ship's intercom crackled to life with the captain's voice. "All passengers, we're approaching the Nexus jump point. Prepare for translation to hyperspace. Estimated arrival at Haven Station in 6 standard hours." As the ship began its approach to the jump point, Zara closed her eyes and seemed to drift off to sleep, her breathing slow and peaceful. The other passengers settled in for the long journey ahead, some dozing, others engaging in quiet conversation. Then the alarms began blaring. Red emergency lights bathed the compartment as the ship lurched violently to one side. Passengers were thrown against the walls as artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. The intercom sparked with the captain's panicked voice. "We're under attack. Multiple bogies inbound. All hands to emergency stations." Through the small viewports, the passengers could see sleek black ships emerging from what appeared to be empty space, their hulls rippling with stealth technology as they dropped their cloaking. The distinctive skull and crossbones markings identified them immediately as Shadowborn raiders. The Krillian warrior struggled to his feet, drawing a massive plasma rifle from his back. "Shadowborn! They'll board us within minutes! All who can fight, prepare yourselves!" The Velthan mercenaries hissed in anticipation, their weapons appearing as if by magic from hidden holsters. Other passengers with military experience began forming defensive positions near the compartment's entrance. Zara remained in her corner, seemingly frozen with fear. Tears glistened in her eyes as she clutched her travel bag to her chest. "I'm scared," she whispered to no one in particular. The ship shuddered as docking clamps attached to the hull with metallic clangs that echoed throughout the vessel. Cutting torches began their work, and the acrid smell of melting metal filled the air. The Shadowborn were known for taking slaves rather than simply killing their victims, but their methods of recruitment were notoriously brutal. "Human girl," the scarred Velthan called out, his voice dripping with false kindness. "Come here. We'll protect you." His companions laughed, a sound like steam escaping from broken pipes. Zara shook her head, pressing herself further into the corner. "Please, I just want to go home," she sobbed. The first section of hull fell away with a thunderous crash, and dark figures began pouring through the breach. The Shadowborn were a nomadic species that had embraced cybernetic enhancement to an extreme degree. More machine than flesh, they moved with inhuman precision, their weapons integrated directly into their arms and torsos. The defending passengers opened fire immediately, filling the compartment with the harsh light of energy weapons. The Krillion's plasma rifle roared, cutting down two Shadowborn as they tried to establish a foothold. The Veltans spread out, using their natural agility to find cover while returning fire, but the Shadowborn kept coming, their superior technology and numbers slowly overwhelming the improvised defense. For every raider that fell, 2 more took their place. Their return fire was devastatingly accurate, and within minutes, half the defending passengers lay wounded or dead. The scarred Velthon found himself pinned behind an overturned cargo container, his weapon's power cell nearly depleted. Across the compartment, he could see the human girl still cowering in her corner, apparently paralyzed with terror. A cold smile crossed his reptilian features as an idea formed. "Shadowborn!" he called out in their guttural language. "The small human female! She's valuable! Military family!" The attacking raiders paused their assault, their glowing optical sensors focusing on Zara. In their culture, valuable hostages meant significant profit, and profit was always worth preserving. Their leader, a towering figure whose original species was no longer identifiable beneath layers of mechanical augmentation, gestured for his troops to advance more carefully. "Surround the human," the leader commanded through his external speakers. "Stun only. If she's damaged, I'll feed whoever's responsible to the void." Zara's sobs grew louder as the Shadowborn began advancing toward her position. The remaining defenders tried to intercede, but they were forced back by overwhelming firepower. The Krillian warrior roared in fury as an energy bolt caught him in the shoulder, sending him crashing to the deck. "Please don't hurt me," Zara whimpered as the raiders closed in. "I'm nobody important. I'm just trying to get home." The Shadowborn leader laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "The Velthan says otherwise, little flesh thing. You'll bring a fine price in the slave markets of the Outer Rim." As the nearest Shadowborn reached for her with a mechanical claw, something changed in Zara's posture. Her sobbing stopped abruptly, and when she looked up, her eyes had gone completely cold. The transformation was so sudden and complete that even the advancing raiders hesitated. "I really hoped it wouldn't come to this," she said, her voice no longer soft and frightened, but carrying an edge like sharpened steel. "I was having such a nice, quiet trip." The Shadowborn leader tilted his head, confused by the sudden change in their prey. "What are you babbling about, meat?" Zara slowly stood up, her movements now fluid and controlled. She unzipped her travel bag and reached inside, withdrawing what appeared to be a small, innocent-looking device, no larger than a data pad. "Do you know what this is?" she asked conversationally. "Some pathetic human toy," one of the raiders sneered, raising his weapon arm. "Enough games. Take her." Zara smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "This is a military-grade combat enhancement interface, Model 7. They only issue these to very special people." She pressed a sequence of buttons on the device, and it immediately began to glow with a soft blue light. "Tactical assessment complete," the device announced in a calm, synthetic voice. 17 hostile targets identified. Probability of successful engagement 97.4%. Initiating combat protocols. The Shadowborn leader's optical sensors widened as he processed what he was seeing. Model 7 interfaces were legendary among military circles, issued only to humanity's most elite special forces operatives. But that was impossible. The creature before him was just a fragile human female, barely large enough to threaten a child. "Impossible," he growled. "Humans don't possess that level of technology integration." Zara's smile grew wider, revealing perfect white teeth. "You know, that's exactly what the hegemony said during the Outer Colonies War, right before we systematically dismantled their entire battle fleet." She attached the device to her wrist, where it interfaced seamlessly with what the passengers now realized were not ordinary clothing, but some form of adaptive armor system. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. Zara's movements became blindingly fast, her small frame suddenly moving with the precision of a machine and the grace of a dancer. She rolled forward, covering the distance to the nearest Shadowborn in the blink of an eye. The raider tried to bring his weapon to bear, but Zara was already inside his guard. Her small fist struck his chest plate with enough force to buckle the reinforced metal, and sparks flew as his internal systems were disrupted. She spun around his falling form, using it as a shield against the energy bolts now filling the air around her. What followed was less a battle than an exhibition of controlled violence. Zara moved through the Shadowborn forces like a force of nature, every action calculated and precise. She used their own weapons against them, tearing integrated guns from their arms and turning them on their former owners. When those ran out of power, she employed their claws and blade attachments with surgical efficiency. The surviving passengers watched in stunned silence as the small human woman systematically dismantled what had been an overwhelming enemy force. Her movements were too fast to follow clearly, but the results were undeniable. Shadowborn warriors who had seemed invincible moments before were now scattered across the compartment as smoking wreckage. The Velthan, who had tried to betray her, pressed himself against the wall, his reptilian features pale with terror. He had dealt with human military forces before, but this was something else entirely. This was what humans became when they stopped pretending to be civilized. The Shadowborn leader, realizing his forces were being annihilated, made a desperate attempt to reach his emergency transponder. If he could call in reinforcements from the other ships in his fleet, they might still salvage the situation. His mechanical fingers were inches from the device when a small hand closed around his wrist with crushing force. "I wouldn't," Zara said pleasantly, her grip slowly crushing the reinforced metal of his arm. "Your friends out there are probably wondering why you've gone quiet. We don't want them to panic and do something rash." The raider leader looked down at this small human female who had single-handedly destroyed his boarding party, and for the first time in decades, he felt something he had almost forgotten: fear. "What are you?" he whispered. Zara tilted her head, considering the question. "Well, officially, I'm Lieutenant Chen of the Earth Defense Corps, Special Operations Division. Unofficially." Her grip tightened, and the Shadowborn's arm began to buckle. "I'm the reason smart pirates avoid human space." The Shadowborn fleet hung in space around the transport ship, like hungry predators surrounding wounded prey. 3 heavy cruisers and a dozen smaller attack craft maintained a tight perimeter, their weapons trained on the vessel's hull. On the bridge of the lead cruiser, Captain Vex monitored the boarding operation through his tactical display. "Boarding teams have been silent for over 10 minutes, his communications officer reported, mechanical fingers dancing across holographic controls. "Standard protocol calls for status updates every 5 minutes. Vex's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on the transport ship. Something had gone wrong. His boarding parties were experienced professionals who had captured hundreds of vessels without significant losses. The passengers on that transport were mostly refugees and civilians. There should have been minimal resistance. "Signal the secondary teams," he ordered. "Full combat deployment. Something's eliminated our advance forces." Inside the transport ship, Zara wiped a small amount of hydraulic fluid from her cheek with the back of her hand. The passenger compartment resembled a mechanical graveyard, with the remains of 17 Shadowborn raiders scattered across the deck. The air still hummed with residual energy from discharged weapons, and the acrid smell of burned circuits filled the space. The surviving passengers stared at her in various states of shock and awe. The massive Krillian warrior, still clutching his wounded shoulder, looked at her with something approaching religious reverence. The Velthan mercenaries had gone completely silent, their predatory confidence replaced by barely controlled terror. "Is everyone all right?" Zara asked. her voice returning to its earlier soft tone as she deactivated her combat interface. The blue glow faded from the device on her wrist, and her posture relaxed slightly, though she remained alert. An elderly Centauran female, her forearms trembling, managed to find her voice. You're military? But you seemed so... Harmless? Zara supplied with a gentle smile. That's generally the idea. Most species expect human females to be non-combatants. It's a useful misconception. She moved through the wreckage, checking on the wounded passengers with practiced efficiency. We need to prepare for the next wave. This was just a scouting force. The scarred Velthon, who had tried to use her as a bargaining chip, slithered closer, his serpentine body low to the ground in a submissive posture. Lieutenant? I apologize for my earlier words. I didn't understand. Zara glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable. You tried to sell me to slavers. We'll discuss that later. Right now I need information about this ship's defensive capabilities. The Krillian warrior struggled to his feet, his natural armor bearing fresh scorch marks. I am Thane Corvash of the Iron Clan. I have fought beside humans before, but never have I witnessed such artistry in combat. What manner of warrior are you? The kind that tries very hard to avoid fighting, Zara replied, moving to one of the sealed viewports. Through the transparent aluminum, she could see the Shadowborn fleet repositioning for a full assault. But when combat becomes necessary, I believe in ending it quickly. She turned back to the passengers, her demeanor shifting into command mode. Listen carefully. In approximately 15 minutes, this ship is going to be swarmed by every raider in that fleet. Our only chance of survival is to make them believe the cost of taking us is too high. A young Altarian pilot, his blue-scaled features pale with fear, raised a webbed hand. But there are only a few dozen of us, and most aren't fighters. How can we possibly... By being smart, Zara interrupted. Humans didn't become a galactic power through superior numbers or natural weapons. We succeeded because we're very good at making our enemies defeat themselves. She began moving through the compartment, examining the structure and emergency systems. This transport has emergency blast barriers, doesn't it? The Altarian nodded. Standard safety protocol, but they're designed to contain hull breaches, not enemy forces. Perfect. Zara located the manual controls for the ship's emergency systems, hidden behind a service panel. Thane Corvash, I need you and your warriors to create firing positions at these 3 points. She indicated specific locations around the compartment. When they breach, let the first wave get about halfway in before opening fire. The Krillian's mandibles clicked in confusion. Forgive me, Lieutenant, but that seems tactically unsound. Should we not engage them at the breach point? Normally, yes. But we're not trying to stop them. We're trying to channel them. Zara's fingers flew over the emergency controls, reprogramming the blast barrier systems. The second group will come through expecting to support the first. Instead, they'll find themselves trapped between our fire and their own dead. Understanding dawned in the warrior's compound eyes. A killing box. But what of the third wave? There won't be one, Zara said confidently. By then, their captain will realize he's not dealing with ordinary prey. She finished her modifications and sealed the control panel. Remember, the goal isn't to win the fight. It's to make them decide the fight isn't worth winning. The ship's hull rang like a bell as multiple docking clamps attached simultaneously. This time, the Shadowborn weren't taking chances. Through the viewports, the passengers could see armored figures with heavy cutting equipment preparing to breach the hull at 6 different points. Zara moved to the center of the compartment, her combat interface active once again. They're coming through in coordinated waves. Stay calm, follow the plan, and remember, humans have survived this long because we're too stubborn to know when we're beaten. The first breach came with a thunderous explosion that left everyone's ears ringing. Heavily armored Shadowborn troopers poured through the opening, their weapons sweeping the compartment for targets. These weren't the boarding specialists from before. These were assault troops, built for overwhelming force rather than precision. Following Zara's instructions, the defending passengers held their fire as the raiders advanced into the compartment. The Shadowborn, emboldened by the lack of immediate resistance, pushed deeper inside, seeking cover behind overturned furniture and cargo containers. When half the assault force was committed to the interior, Zara gave a subtle hand signal. The defenders opened fire from concealed positions, catching the raiders in a deadly crossfire. But this was just the beginning. As the second wave prepared to reinforce their pinned comrades, Zara triggered the modified blast barriers. Instead of sealing breaches, the emergency system now created a maze of force fields that divided the compartment into isolated sections. The incoming Shadowborn found themselves separated from their allies and trapped in overlapping fields of fire. The slaughter was methodical and brutal. Without room to maneuver or retreat, the technologically superior raiders were reduced to shooting at shadows, while the defenders picked them apart from prepared positions. Within minutes, the second wave joined the first in mechanical death. On the bridge of the lead cruiser, Captain Vex watched his tactical display with growing disbelief. 2 full assault teams had been destroyed, and the transport ship showed no signs of damage to its core systems. Whatever was on that vessel had turned his routine capture operation into a costly nightmare. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the boarding teams are requesting immediate extraction. They report encountering what they describe as enhanced human combat specialists." Vex's optical implants flared with red light. Enhanced humans were a myth, a story told by defeated enemies to explain their failures. Humans were weak, short-lived creatures who relied on primitive weapons and crude tactics. The idea that they could field warriors capable of matching Shadowborn technology was absurd. "Prepare the antimatter charges," he ordered. "If we can't take the ship intact, we'll settle for ensuring no one escapes to tell tales." But before the weapons could be deployed, something extraordinary happened. The transport ship's communications array activated, broadcasting on all frequencies simultaneously. The voice that emerged was unmistakably human, female, and utterly calm. "Shadowborn vessels, this is Lieutenant Zara Chen of the Earth Defense Corps. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system before I demonstrate why attacking human civilians is considered a fatal error in judgment." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of electronics. Finally, one of the junior officers spoke up, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Sir, our sensors show only one human life sign aboard that transport. She can't possibly—" "I'm uploading my military credentials to your tactical network," the human's voice continued. "Feel free to verify my identity and service record. You'll find it illuminating." Captain Vex's optical implants flickered as he accessed the incoming data. What he saw made his cybernetic heart skip a beat. The service record was genuine, verified by multiple galactic databases. Lieutenant Zara Chen, Special Operations Division, Earth Defense Corps. Combat decorations from a dozen campaigns. Confirmed kills in the thousands. But it was her unofficial designation that made his hydraulic systems run cold. The Whisper. One of humanity's legendary ghost operatives, soldiers so effective they had become mythical figures even among their enemies. Stories told of humans who could walk through enemy fleets like phantoms, leaving only wreckage in their wake. 15 seconds, the human's voice announced pleasantly. "I should mention that Earth Defense Corps protocols authorize me to use any means necessary to protect civilian populations, the emphasis being on any means." Vex found his voice, though it came out as a mechanical rasp. "You're one human on a civilian transport. You can't threaten an entire fleet." The response came immediately, and for the first time, there was something cold and predatory in the human's tone. Captain Vex of the cruiser Soul Render, former enforcer for the Hegemony's Third Fleet, 7 war crimes convictions, wanted by the Galactic Justice Council with a bounty of 50 million credits. There was a pause that seemed to stretch forever. Did you really think we weren't watching you? As if summoned by her words, new contacts began appearing on the tactical display. Ships decloak around the Shadowborn fleet, their hulls bearing the distinctive markings of the Earth Defense Corps. Not a full fleet, but enough firepower to turn the engagement into a very costly proposition. 5 seconds, Lieutenant Chen announced. Choose wisely, Captain. History will remember what happens next. Captain Vex stared at his tactical display, watching as targeting locks began to appear on his ships. The human had been right. They had walked into a trap, led by their own greed and misconceptions about human capability. The transport hadn't been random prey. It had been bait. All ships, he transmitted to his fleet. Emergency jump. Disengage immediately. As the Shadowborn vessels began their hasty retreat, powering up their jump drives in obvious panic, Zara Chen allowed herself a small smile. Through the viewport, she watched the Raider fleet disappear into hyperspace, leaving behind only the echo of their fear and the floating debris of their hubris. The surviving passengers sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had witnessed. The fragile human girl who had seemed so helpless was apparently one of the most dangerous individuals in known space, and she had just used their transport as a base of operations to orchestrate the destruction of an entire pirate fleet. Well, Zara said, deactivating her combat systems and returning to her corner seat. That was exciting. I hope the rest of the journey is more peaceful. 3 days after the Shadowborn encounter, the transport ship, Meridian's Hope, docked at Haven Station, a massive orbital facility serving as a neutral meeting point for dozens of species. The station's gleaming hull rotated slowly against the backdrop of a brilliant nebula, its docking bays busy with ships from across the galaxy. Word of the battle had somehow preceded them, despite the remote location of the engagement. As the passengers disembarked, they found themselves surrounded by news crews, military attachés, and curious onlookers from a dozen species. Everyone wanted to see the human who had single-handedly defeated a Shadowborn fleet. Zara Chen walked down the boarding ramp looking exactly as she had at the beginning of the journey, small, fragile, and utterly unremarkable. Her travel bag was slung over one shoulder, and she moved with the same quiet grace that had initially marked her as an easy target. The watching crowd murmured in confusion, having expected someone more imposing. "That's her?" a draconian reporter hissed to his cameraman. "She looks like she'd blow away in a strong wind." The other passengers from the transport maintained a respectful distance, still processing the revelation of who had been traveling among them. Thane Corvash, his wounded shoulder now properly treated by the ship's medical systems, approached her as they reached the main concourse. "Lieutenant Chen," the Krillian warrior rumbled, his voice carrying a note of reverence. "My clan would be honored to offer you guest rights. Your actions saved not just our lives, but our honor." Zara smiled, the same warm expression she had worn throughout the journey's beginning. "Thank you, Thane, but I really do need to get home. My leave is almost over, and my commanding officer gets cranky when people are late." The scarred Velthon mercenary, who had remained conspicuously quiet since the battle, slithered forward with obvious reluctance. His earlier predatory confidence had been replaced by something approaching fear. "Human, Lieutenant, I must ask, will you report my betrayal to the authorities?" Zara considered him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Around them, the bustle of the station continued, but their small group existed in a bubble of tense silence. "You endangered civilian lives for personal gain," she said finally. "In human space, that would be a serious crime." The Velthan's scales went pale. I understand. I accept whatever punishment. However, Zara interrupted, you also fought beside us when the real danger came. In my experience, people can change when they're given the opportunity. She reached into her travel bag and withdrew a small data card. This contains contact information for the Refugee Protection Agency. They're always looking for guides familiar with the border regions, the pay is honest, and the work helps people instead of hurting them. The Velthan stared at the card as if it might explode. You're giving me a second chance? Everyone deserves a second chance, Zara replied. What you do with it is up to you. As the group began to disperse, each passenger heading to their own destinations, a commotion erupted near the main information center. A squad of heavily armed hegemony soldiers was pushing through the crowd, their weapons clearly visible despite station regulations prohibiting military hardware in civilian areas. The hegemony was one of the more aggressive expansionist powers, known for their belief in species supremacy and their particular hatred of humans. They considered Earth's rapid rise to galactic prominence a threat to the natural order, where stronger species dominated weaker ones. Where is the human terrorist? The squad leader demanded, his voice amplified by external speakers built into his armor. We know she's on this station. Zara sighed quietly and adjusted her travel bag. Around her, the other passengers from the transport stepped slightly closer, forming an unconscious protective circle. Even the Velthan mercenary positioned himself between her and the approaching soldiers. I really hope to avoid this, she murmured. The hegemony squad spotted their group and began pushing more aggressively through the crowd. Their leader, a massive Thoraxian whose natural armor had been enhanced with military-grade plating, pointed directly at Zara. You, human! You are under arrest for the destruction of hegemony vessels and the murder of hegemony citizens! The watching crowd began to back away, sensing the potential for violence. Station security forces were notably absent, suggesting someone with authority had cleared them out. This had the hallmarks of a planned operation. Zara stepped forward, placing herself between the soldiers and her former fellow passengers. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said in her soft, pleasant voice. I'm just a passenger traveling home from vacation. The squad leader's mandibles clicked with what might have been laughter. The famous whisper tries to play innocent? We know what you are, human. Your species' pet assassin, a war criminal hiding behind false weakness. War criminal? Zara's voice remained calm, but something subtle had changed in her posture. That's a very serious accusation. Do you have evidence to support it? The evidence is in the wreckage you left behind. The Thoraxian gestured to his squad, who began to spread out in a standard arrest formation. 17 Shadowborn vessels destroyed, hundreds of crew members killed, all by one pathetic human female who pretends to be helpless. The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the confrontation. Among the spectators, Zara noticed several beings recording the incident, including news crews from major galactic networks. This wasn't just an arrest. It was a propaganda opportunity. I see, she said thoughtfully. So the hegemony is now defending pirates? How interesting. I wasn't aware your government had expanded into the protection of slavers and murderers. The squad leader's compound eyes flared with anger. The Shadowborn were operating under hegemony letters of marque. They were legitimate privateers engaged in legal commerce raiding. A murmur went through the crowd at this revelation. Letters of marque were an ancient legal concept that essentially legalized piracy for government purposes. The hegemony had just admitted to sponsoring the very raiders who had attacked civilian refugees. Zara nodded as if this confirmed something she had suspected. So, when I defended a transport full of innocent civilians from armed raiders, I was actually interfering with an official hegemony operation. Is that your position? Exactly. And now you will pay the price for... The squad leader's words were cut off as the main holographic display throughout the station activated simultaneously. The image that appeared was instantly recognizable to anyone who followed galactic politics. Admiral Sarah Morrison, commander of the Earth Defense Corps and one of the most respected military leaders in known space. Citizens of Haven Station, the Admiral's amplified voice filled the concourse. It has come to my attention that representatives of the hegemony are attempting to arrest one of my officers for the crime of protecting innocent civilians from pirate attack. The Thoraxian squad leader's armor made a high-pitched whining sound as his cooling systems struggled with his rising body temperature. Around him, his soldiers began looking distinctly uncomfortable. Furthermore, Admiral Morrison continued, we have confirmed that these so-called pirates were operating under hegemony authority, making this incident an act of state-sponsored terrorism against refugee populations. The Earth Defense Corps considers this a direct violation of multiple galactic treaties. The crowd's murmur grew louder as the implications became clear. The hegemony hadn't just been caught protecting pirates, they had been caught using them to attack civilians in neutral space. Lieutenant Chen, the Admiral said, her image focusing directly on Zara's position. You are hereby ordered to return to Earth immediately for debriefing and commendation. Any attempt to interfere with this order will be considered an act of war against the Earth Defense Corps and will be responded to accordingly. The holographic display flickered and changed, showing the space around Haven Station. Where there had been only civilian traffic moments before, now showed the massive forms of human warships decloaking from stealth positions. A full battle group, led by the legendary dreadnought, Righteous Fury. The hegemony soldiers found themselves suddenly surrounded by a crowd that had grown distinctly hostile. Beings from species that had suffered under hegemony expansion pressed closer, their faces showing barely contained anger at the revelation of state-sponsored piracy. You've made a mistake, Zara told the squad leader, her voice still gentle but carrying an undertone of finality. You assume that because I'm small and quiet I must be weak. You assume that because I was traveling alone I was unprotected. And you assume that because humans appear peaceful, we don't notice when someone threatens us. She gestured to the holographic display showing the human fleet. The truth is, Lieutenant, we're always watching. We're always ready. And we never, ever abandon our people. The Thoraxian squad leader looked around at the hostile crowd, the human warships, and the small woman who had somehow turned his propaganda operation into a public relations disaster. His squad was beginning to edge toward the exits, their earlier confidence evaporating like mist. This isn't over, he growled. But the threat sounded hollow even to his own audio receptors. Zara smiled, and for a moment it was the same warm, innocent expression she had worn throughout the journey. Oh, but it is, she said softly. You see, the wonderful thing about being underestimated is that it gives you so many opportunities to educate people. As the hegemony soldiers retreated with whatever dignity they could salvage, the crowd began to disperse. The news crews were already transmitting their recordings across the galaxy, and within hours, the story would reach every inhabited system. The hegemony had been caught red-handed sponsoring piracy, and a single human operative had exposed their operation for all to see. Thane Corvash approached Zara one final time as she prepared to board the Earth Defense Corps shuttle that had docked to retrieve her. Lieutenant, the Krillian warrior said formally, I have learned something important on this journey. Oh? What's that? I have learned never to judge a warrior by their appearance, he replied. And I have learned why the humans say still waters run deep. Zara laughed, a sound like silver bells in the recycled air of the station. Actually, Thane, there's another human saying that's more appropriate here. Speak softly and carry a big stick. She gestured toward the viewport where the massive human warships were visible against the nebula's glow. "We just prefer to keep our stick well hidden until we need it." As her shuttle departed Haven Station, carrying her back to Earth and home, the other passengers from the Meridian's Hope went their separate ways, but each of them carried with them a new understanding of humanity and a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. The story of how a fragile human girl had turned out to be one of the most dangerous people in the galaxy. The story of how humans had learned to weaponize mercy, turning their apparent weakness into their greatest strength. And the story of why, throughout known space, smart beings had learned a simple rule: never threaten something a human cares about, because you never know which unassuming passenger might turn out to be their guardian angel. In the years that followed, the incident at Haven Station would become a cautionary tale told across the galaxy. The hegemony never again attempted to openly sponsor piracy, having learned that humans had very long memories and absolutely no sense of proportion when it came to protecting innocent lives. And somewhere in human space, Lieutenant Zara Chen returned to her quiet life, looking exactly like what she appeared to be: a small, fragile girl who wouldn't hurt a fly, until someone gave her a reason to prove them wrong.